Michele Monro is the daughter of much-loved singer Matt Monro. She's the author of the internationally best-selling biography of his life, The Singer's Singer, and she released a brand new album of her father's work, Stranger in Paradise, The Lost New York Sessions, in 2020, which went straight to the number 8 spot in the official album charts. And she's recently released her brand new book, The Autonomous Cruiser, the complete guide to cruising for and with disabled travellers. And she's with us here just now. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Toby, thanks.
So we'll talk about the book in a second, but first of all, your father, Matt Monro, was he already famous before you were born, or was that something that sort of came about later?
I was very little, you know. I mean, he'd been struggling for a lot of years. He didn't actually make it till he was about 30, so, you know, I was very little, and I wasn't sort of aware at, you know, the first few years of my life what was going on, and I didn't realise that other parents didn't travel all the time, or, you know, didn't have people at the house all the time and interviews and all that. To me, it was a normal life. I didn't know any different.
And at what point did you realise that that wasn't normal?
Well, the first oddity was when Dad was in the Eurovision Song Contest, and we were watching it at home. My mum and my brother had just been born, so it's 1964. And I couldn't understand why Dad was in the room, so to speak, but not there. And I left the room in disgust, apparently, because I didn't get it at all. And then the very first time I saw him live, it was, I was like, oh, these people are applauding. He hadn't even opened his mouth. He'd only walked on the stage. And I'm like, wow, what's going on? It was surreal, really. And, you know, something I grew to get used to in one way. But I mean, you know, for all the perks and nice homes, holidays you have, you know, Dad was away 9 months of every year, all the missed birthdays and special events, the school, you know, sports days and things he's not there for. So that was very difficult.
Yeah. And what is the main memory that you have of him?
He was just a great guy. I loved him, dear, and he still do. And he was my knight in shining armour. Yeah. You know, I was his princess. I'm the only girl. So, it was a special relationship. And we moved to Florida in 1980. And my dad and I used to go out every morning about 7 or 8 and play around a golf. And my mum called herself a golf widow, but we were home by midday usually. So she was fine with that. But those were special times, you know. It's just unfortunate that when he had, was earning sufficient money, if you like, to take it a little easier and spend more time is when he was taken away, sadly. But that's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
He was only 54, you know, so it's no age.
But of course, he had a prolific career in his life. He was the first person to actually sing a Bond theme.
Yeah, well, that was great. I mean, you know, my dad loved the movies anyway, I mean, especially spy movies. And when he was asked to do it, it wasn't the first Bond movie, but the first was Dr. No, but it only had an instrumental. So he was asked to do this. Of course, he didn't know he was going to set a precedent that still exists today. So, yes, he was the very first.
Yeah.
And it often comes up in the charts of the best of Bond, that he's still in the top 10, you know, which is great. Fabulous, really.
Yeah. And I suppose at that time, it was only the second Bond film. So did he realise how much of a big thing it would be?
Well, he didn't at the time. I mean, you couldn't predict the phenomenon that the Bond would become. I mean, with Dad, Bond and the Beatles, they were the 3 biggest exports England had in the 60s. It was incredible. And also, you see, he did Born Free, the movie, which was global, as was The Italian Job on Days Like These. And that's what propelled him from being a British singer to an international artist, because those films went worldwide and suddenly he was in demand everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting that perhaps his arguably 3 biggest songs are from movies, but he's a lot more than that, isn't he, really?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, he had Walk Away, Softly As I Leave You. There are the big hits. It's just that the Bond, because every time they release a new Bond film, there's talk of the older ones and they replay them. And so it brings it to people's mind a lot, you know. And of course, The Italian Job, and it's iconic. So again, it's on television a lot, and it brings it to people's minds more.
Yeah. And of course you wrote this biography about him, the singer's singer. What made you want to actually write a book about him?
Well, because, whenever you spoke to people and said, who's Matt Monro, they would say, oh, yeah, he's the singing bus driver and he did Bond or he did Born Free. And then they'd stop and they didn't know anything more. And I thought that was really dreadful. And also, I wanted people to know the man behind the voice. And I wrote it really for my son, because when I'm no longer here, I wanted him to know that his granddad was more than just a good singer. Yeah. There was a lot more substance to him. And I thought it important that people knew the story.
Absolutely. And that's the point as well. It's the story. It's not about your relationship with him, is it? As some people might assume, it's very much about him.
I actually wrote the book in the third person because a few years earlier I'd read a book by Nancy Sinatra on her dad, and it was Daddy this and Daddy that, and it made me feel a bit icky if I did it in that vein. And I wanted the reader to be immersed in the story, it wasn't important who wrote it. As far as I was concerned. So there are quotes in the book from me, but as I say, I've written it in the third person, which my publisher wasn't happy about at the beginning, but it was the right thing to do, to be honest. I mean, last January, not this year, last year, 10 years of the contract was up and they actually renewed it because it's still selling and it's amazing. I mean, I'm lucky enough to work on the cruise ships and I do talks on my dad's life and music. And every time I take books on, I think, shall I bother? Everybody must have it by now. And yet I sell out every single time. So it's amazing because Dad's been gone 37 years. It's a whole new generation of fans now.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have to do some research? Because obviously you know a lot more about your father than the average person, but was there still stuff that perhaps you found out along the way that you didn't know?
Yeah, obviously all the years before I was born. I mean, there was 30 sort of, I don't know, quite a lot to 29 years before I was born. So I did 2 years of research and I interviewed people he was in the army with, people he was evacuated with, and got the real gist of what he was like. I mean, obviously my mum was still here at the time, so, and when he was here himself, I'd asked him various questions. It was an eye-opener really, but because of the advent of the internet, I was able to talk to people worldwide, which I wouldn't have had a chance to otherwise. And you wait 4 weeks, 6 weeks for a reply and a letter. I was getting instant replies, and then they would say, well, actually I know this guy and I know this guy, and so it sort of escalated. So I did 2 years worth because there's a lot of celebrity names in the book that gave interviews, but I wanted it to be real. As I say, I didn't want it just to be for me. So if I said to you in the book, oh, this record came out and it was fabulous, people would say, well, she would say that. But if I actually put the press cuttings and George Martin's quotes and this one and that one, then it enforced the story rather than, oh, she was just saying that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned George Martin because there was quite a sort of ongoing relationship between George Martin and your father, wasn't there, making records? Well,
they were best friends. I mean, first of all, Daddy came before the Beatles, you have to realise. And then when George had his success with the Beatles, he didn't need Dad financially or creatively, but he never left him. I mean, they had a fantastic relationship. They loved recording together, and they produced some fabulous music over the years,
And what is your favourite song that your father has ever recorded?
Well, the first time he took me to the recording studio at Abbey Road, and it was a hive of activity. I mean, there was equipment everywhere. There was about 40 musicians tuning up. It was bedlam. And in walked George Martin and tapped what looked like a pencil to me on his on the pedestal, and everything went deathly quiet. And I'm kind of looking around in stunned amazement, and my dad beckoned me over, held my hand and sang Michele. And that was the recording that was cut and released to disc. And that memory will always stay with me. And then, funny enough, when the book was released, the publishers threw a press party, and unbelievably, George Martin came, and it was held at EMI, and George Martin hadn't walked into EMI in years because of bad blood. And not only did he come, but he brought with him a framed score from that session of Michele. Wow. And he wrote on it, "Your dad would want you to have this," and it's on my wall.
Wow, that's incredible. Did he decide to sing that song because of you then?
Yeah, but he surprised me because he didn't tell me he was going to record it. And I can still see myself standing there holding his hand and him singing it to me. And he did it in one take. And it was incredible. I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Now, you've recently released this new book, which is quite different, but it's an interesting idea. It's The Autonomous Cruiser, the complete guide to cruising for and with disabled travellers. Now, this book is sort of the first of its kind, isn't it?
It's a market first, yeah, and I felt very passionate about it. I mean, I've been cruising over 40 years. I also was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis about 25 years ago, odd. And then when I started working on the ships, I came across people of all different special needs who were telling me their upsets and frustrations and problems with booking the cruise or getting on it or getting off it. And I myself was noticing challenges that I hadn't had as an able-bodied person before. And I just couldn't believe there was nothing in the market to advise or help. And one thing that came up time and time again, which absolutely shocked me to the core, was sometimes a ship can't berth. It has to lay anchor, and it's called tendering. And they use the lifeboats to ferry passengers across to the berth. Yeah. Well, what a lot of people in permanent wheelchair users didn't know is they're not allowed to use it. Oh. So they booked a trip thinking they can get off here, there and everywhere, and then find they can't. And it was something that they weren't aware of when they booked. And I mean, the websites have got a little better now, the cruise websites. But to be honest, I feel they only put what they need to put to protect themselves. Whereas I wanted a proper guide, and also for a lot of people who have a special need, there's also an able-bodied person traveling with them. So it's a complete guide to cruising, and it tells you all, because it's not just, a cruise ship. There's expedition ships, there's river cruises, there's adventure cruises. So there's all different types to consider. And I wanted to talk you through from the very first moment of choosing, then your cabin, then your destination, the paperwork you need, the medication names you need. And it goes right through to the minute that you come back and get off. Yeah. And it has even the scams that happen in port. It really, I feel that information is a power, and it gives you the power to make informed decisions by yourself.
Yeah.
I tell you one story. The internet's fabulous, but it is also dangerous because it's not policed. So there's lots of websites that are dead. There's out-of-date information. You can read an article, but not know it might have been written 5 years before. And a woman booked a trip to Venice. Her husband was paraplegic, and she did all her research online, found out when the bridge lifts were operational, only to get there to see that they were being closed 3 years earlier. Oh. Yeah, well, if you've been to Venice, it's all bridges and water. There are no roads and there's no cabs. Yeah. So you don't want to be stuck there with a wheelchair user. I mean, and purely because she'd looked online and not verified it anywhere else. But I mean, travel agents, the high street ones, are fabulous, but most of the people have never been on a cruise ship. Mm. If you use a specialized travel agent, it costs you no more money, but they've been on those ships and they'll know exactly what will suit your need. And I got to tell you, having done it for more than 4 decades, it's the best way to have a holiday if you get it right. Yeah. And it's the worst nightmare if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you're stuck at sea, primarily. But it is a floating resort. I mean, there's places I don't even get off the ship anymore. I just stay on and enjoy, what is a floating hotel, really. Yeah. And I love it. So you wake up and the islands or the countries have come to you. And I mean, I'm hoping it gives people the confidence possibly to try a holiday for the very first time. I don't know whether you're aware, but there's a lot of people with kidney problems who are tethered to dialysis machine, and they think they can't go away. But there are now a company called Dialysis at Sea, and you can go on, you can have your breakfast, go down for your treatment, and you're back for lunch.
Wow.
So you can go away.
Yeah, that's quite a good idea.
But you've got to know about these things.
Yeah. So what is the solution if some places aren't really suitable? Is it just try to go to places that are suitable?
Yeah, I think the main thing is pick the ship that's right for you. That's very, very important. Because as I say, some people are quite prepared not to get off the ship. They just want to go away. But yes, your destination has to be your second consideration, because the Caribbean is not well suited to a permanent wheelchair user.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, don't forget, when you talk disability, most people do think of wheelchairs, but there's so many hidden disabilities like diabetes and heart disease. And, you know, there's people with possible hearing problems and sight problems that you might not be aware of, but it all needs consideration, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if you book the right cabins, some have vibrating beds and alarms vibrating everything, so that if you can't hear anything, you are alerted to the fact that there is either someone at the door or there's a problem or whatever, you know, so you don't have to feel isolated.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about the whole lifeboats thing, because what happens in an emergency? Presumably there's a way that they can still use them.
If you have a special need, you have to book and tell the cruise line, and you go through a special department, and then you are allocated staff members once you get on the cruise ship. And when you do your lifeboat drill, you know, they will tell you, this is what's going to happen, you know, and you'll either, if you're they'll come to the cabin to get you, or if you're not there, you know, others will guide you. They're aware that you're on the ship and that you will need help. Some people don't need help.
Yeah.
You know, some people know exactly what to do, because, you know, they can see and they can hear and they can walk, but it doesn't mean they haven't got a different disability.
Yeah. And in terms of destinations as well, where are perhaps the best destinations for people with disabilities? I suppose, can it depend on the specific disability?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you know, America is probably one of the greatest places to go for anyone with any special need, because they've got the Disability Act. And so hotels and venues, they've got to conform, as do the cruise ships. We don't have that in our country. So Celebrity, for instance, who are American, but they do travel out of England a lot, they've just introduced something called a magic carpet on their 3 new cruise ships. And it's a level that travels outside the ship, up and down the side of it, and it will take a wheelchair user onto the tender. But, you know, these things cost millions of pounds. So an older company with older ships are not going to make that sort of investment. I mean, it's a rule of thumb like anything, isn't it? The newer, the better the facilities, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I mean, a lot of the cruise ships now have pool hoists, so you can go swimming. You know, they've got electronic doors. They've got braille numbers on the cabins. So, you know, they've implemented a lot. Yeah. But as I say, you know, doesn't mean it's going to suit your special need. If you are a wheelchair user or you have big equipment, you cannot leave it in the corridor. And if you don't know that and you haven't booked an accessible cabin, you won't be allowed on the ship at all.
Yeah.
So you have to know it and book the cabin that's going to suit you and your equipment.
Yeah, that's the thing. I suppose a lot of people might be put off by a cruise if they have a disability. But then even then, a plane can sometimes be difficult, although there are systems in place on there as well, aren't there?
I don't fly anymore. It's too difficult for me, which is why, you know, I drive to one of the English ports. I leave the car, they take the luggage, and that's it. I walk on. Doesn't matter if there's a delay. Everything's open. The bars, the restaurants, the pool.
Yeah.
You know, you're on holiday. Yeah. And the entertainment, everything's included in the price in terms of food and entertainment. I mean, obviously, some cruises do drinks inclusive as well, you know, but if not, then yes, you'd buy your drinks or your extras, if you like, in the shops. But, you know, it's a very good value. What looks expensive on paper, you never pay the brochure price. There's always deals around. But when you consider what is included, it's actually very good value.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea that even if there's a delay, you're already on holiday anyway. So
it doesn't matter.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
I mean, and also on every cruise ship, there's a hospital on board with proper, qualified doctors and medical staff. So, you have that safety net.
Yeah.
But I mean, simple things as well, Toby. One thing I tell everybody, if you've got equipment, even if it's just a phone and a laptop and whatever, always take an extension lead with you, because there is only one plug point in a cabin, which is no good if you've got to charge a wheelchair and you want to charge your phone and you might have an oxygenator. You need multiple points. And they won't tell you that in small print. You have to know these things. And that's why I felt the book needs to, it's literally an A to Z of cruising and what you need to know.
Yeah. I suppose, are there some tips in there that maybe just benefit everyone, even if they don't have a disability?
Well, that's what I just said, like with the extension lead. Whether you've got a mobile phone and a laptop and your camera and you want to recharge everything at the end of each day, but there's lots of tips for everybody. It isn't, as I say, it's not just about the disability or special need, because there's able-bodied people traveling with them. So it gives you dining advice and the entertainment and what packages they include and internets and a lot of people get on the ship and they don't turn their airplane mode on, and then they get big bills and they don't understand why. It's just a matter of knowing, and the book's in sections. So, for instance, there's a big chapter on fly cruising and everything to do with airports and security and baggage, etc. And if you're not flying, then you ignore that chapter. So you don't have to wade through the entire book. You just want to pick the things that are pertinent to you.
Yeah. Well, do you have plans for maybe more books after this one?
Oh, yeah. There's a series of 6 on this. And the next one, which I'm halfway through, is the Special Needs Guide to the ports of Norway. And then after that, it will be, whatever ports in Europe. It's a port guide because, that could be very difficult. If you go to Norway, a lot of the ports are tenders. And like if it's got heavy amount of snow, some of the ports have heated sidewalks or pavements. So they, you can travel on your wheelchair around town. So as I say, some ports are really not good. And even if you are allowed off, you can't get very far if you're in a wheelchair. So, you need to know which ones that will be good for you.
Yeah. Well, where can we find this current book, The Autonomous Cruiser, and also keep up to date with everything, because you run the Matt Monro website, don't you?
Well, I do, yes. I mean, all the news to do with Daddy and myself is on mattmonro.com, and you just click on news and it's updated on the 1st of every month. And the book, of course, is mainly easiest available on Amazon. It's also an ebook as well.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show today.
No, thank you for having me.